Good morning, ladies. Once again, we come together to talk about the process of grieving. As you recall, last time we spoke to two ladies who had lost babies in different circumstances, one through an abortion and other through a baby dying at birth. But today I have two ladies with me and we're going to be speaking about the grieving process, but as it is related to cancer. So with me I have Danelle from Daalen, and she is in the process of fighting cancer. Her and her husband serve on the deacon team of Delport PM. And then I have Cindy Roux, previously Cindy van der Merwe, and many of you may know her, but she lost her husband to cancer, and her husband Mornay was very dear to many of us in JoshGen. And she is now with her husband Emil serving in the Durbanville AM congregation. So today we're going to be asking them a number of questions related to grieving, and as we spoke about last time, grieving is a universal sense of loss or change. So it could be grieving the loss of a job, grieving the loss of a loved one, grieving the loss of a way of life, and we will be talking about that today. So ladies, as you recall last time, we spoke about empathy and being able to support our brothers and sisters in Christ in a meaningful way. And so we're going to ask them to tell their stories and how cancer and the diagnosis of cancer has impacted their lives. The purpose of this being that you and I can enter into the worlds of other people to understand their processes and then listen carefully for the nuggets that they are dropping, which are going to enable us to be very supportive with them and with other people into the future. So Danelle and Cindy, I'm going to ask you to give me a summary of how the cancer diagnosis impacted your lives. Maybe Danelle, we can begin with you.
In 2010, I was diagnosed with a very rare type of cancer. It's called a synovial sarcoma. I wasn't serving the Lord at that time and just living for myself. And He really used that situation to bring me back to Him. I just realized that if I died at that moment, I would not be going to Him. And so He used that situation to work in my life. And He also used it in my family's life. He softened hearts, brought us closer together. And I actually went through treatment, no chemotherapy, but operation and radiation therapy, and ended up being clean for 9 years. And I was fine, and I was healed, basically. And I had the conviction that God had done so much work in that time, that I knew that if He ever allowed it to come back, that it would be for His glory and for more work to be done. It was like a conviction in me. And then 9 years later, Fritz and I were married and we decided to start a family. And I fell pregnant, and halfway through the pregnancy, I started having this little irritating, it's like a crackle in my lungs. And I got a cold, and I just couldn't get over it. I just kept coughing and coughing and coughing. And they actually thought that I had a blood clot in my lung because I was experiencing a lot of pain. And then when they scanned me, they found that I had a massive tumor that had grown around the lung in the chest cavity. And a part of it was in the lung. And my world basically fell apart because we had all these ideas of, pregnancy, family starting together, and suddenly, I had cancer again. And I mean, the doctor said that it's unheard of for the cancer to come back 9 years later. So, it's basically stage 4 spread, metastasized cancer. So that really dropped our faith, but we are remaining steadfast.
And I think it's important to note that during this process, Danelle had to undergo an operation while she was actually pregnant.
Yes.
And so maybe you would just be able to tell us a little bit more about that, Danelle, and how you felt about
Sure.
that situation.
I felt so out of control. It was so hard to understand because God gave us this gift of this baby, and now suddenly we had to fight for both my life and the baby's life, and we had to make a few very hard decisions. They basically told me, you have to operate because that's the first line of defense with these tumors. And they said they want to operate straight away. I think I was 21 weeks pregnant. But they said to me, but it would be catastrophic for your baby. And we decided that we wanted to wait and do another scan to see how fast it was growing and give our baby girl the best chance possible. And when they did a scan 3 weeks later, they found that it had grown with 25%. So it was very aggressive. And they just said to me, you won't make another 3 to 4 weeks. We don't believe you will. So basically the decision was taken out of our hands, and I had to go through a massive operation, and they didn't think that both of us would make it. And we did. Amelia's a miracle baby.
That's wonderful.
So yeah.
That's amazing. It was a miracle.
It
was a miracle. Sure. And Sint, would you like to enlarge a little bit on your experience?
So our history is I married my high school sweetheart. I met him when I was 14. I had this picture of white picket fence, living in the suburbs, and I was 31 at the time. Mornay was a professional rugby player, and he had 2 neck operations before because of scrumming and the impact it had on his neck. So he started getting headaches, these random headaches that just got progressively worse. And we just assumed that it was related to the neck operations. And I remember taking him to hospital for the weekend and on the Friday afternoon, and the doctors also thought, no, maybe it's just his blood pressure. Never did we think that we'd be facing this battle. And on the 9th of January 2011, Mornay was diagnosed with a brain tumor. It was an astrocytoma with characteristics of an ependymoma, and he went into theatre that Monday evening, and my life was shook. We had 2 little boys, or we have 2 little boys. Matthew was 4 at the time, and Joshie was 7, and that's where our journey started. And over a period of 2 years, we battled the cancer fight. When I had 16 operations altogether, he had meningitis. He had to have an external ventricular drain put in on a number of occasions. We got to a point where he couldn't eat, so we had a Mickey put in and we had to feed him into his stomach. So it was a long journey, and on the 18th of January 2013, an incredible man lost his battle with cancer. So that's in a nutshell.
Yeah, and he was an incredible man. And we had the privilege of knowing him from the time that he was in high school.
Yep.
So Dion was actually his school teacher, and he was a highly gifted and talented man. So yes, it was a loss for us, but it was a gain for heaven. And we all gained actually from knowing Mornay. He changed many lives. So Danelle, we know that you have experienced loss in this time. And perhaps you could just give us some insight into some of the grieving that you've had to do over some of the losses that you have already experienced through this process.
I think God takes us through different levels of grieving. It feels like through every stage of this journey, there's been something more to surrender, something more to let go of. And as I said earlier, it's been a long cancer journey. And so when I found out I was pregnant and that I had cancer, you immediately have to let go of that idea of the perfect family picture that you had, So we've had to let go of a lot of freedom. You have these, dreams of going on holidays together as a new family, because Fritz and I love traveling and going on adventures, and suddenly you're restricted. I mean, not only are you a new parent, but now you're dealing with health issues, and you can't just be away from hospitals, and there's a lot of loss of control. And so I had to deal with the loss of not being able to mother correctly, normally. It's basically a loss of normalcy. You've got this picture in your head of you're going to be this mother that looks after your daughter, and then you're not even able to do the night shift with your daughter because you're too weak and you're too... I really struggle with capacity at this point. And one of the big things I had to surrender to God was that mom guilt. Because I know mom guilt is a real thing for any new mother because we always comparing ourselves, and we're always thinking we're not doing enough. But when you physically can't do the basics for your child, that's really hard. And I had to, it's a grieving process of not being able to mother to the fullness. And, and the fears that are connected to that, will she know even that I'm her mother? When we've got an incredible support system. I've got my mother-in-law who's been so lovely and so supportive, and she's living with us. And she's been a godsend for us, and I'm helping with Amelia. But then at the same time, you grieve the fact that you're not the one getting up for her at night. And the other thing that I've grieved is my marriage, actually. I've got an incredible loving husband who just lays down his life for us. But the reality is, they were the good old days of health and doing what we wanted, and now there's always this almost air of cancer. Cancer has a way of getting its fingers everywhere, and it's almost, there's a sadness that comes with it, because when we are alone, sometimes it's like this heaviness, because you just know you're going through this trauma. But it also brings you closer together at the same time. But there is a grief that comes with it, because you're grieving a life that could have been. Even though we think those things are the best things, but God knows better, obviously. So that's part of the surrender. And I think another thing I had to grieve was femininity. Losing my hair for the first time was really hard. I didn't think it was going to be a big deal. I thought, no man, it's hair, And then I ended up in the ICU with a lung infection last year. And I just started chemo, and while I was in the ICU, my hair started falling out. And I said to Fritz, okay, I think it's time that we shave it off, because I just said I don't want it to draw it out, I just want it to be done. And I remember sitting in the ICU, and you feel horrible. I could hardly walk to the bathroom. I couldn't walk to the bathroom by myself. And I remember thinking, I'm 30, I think I was 32 at the time. I'm 32 years old, and I can't even walk myself to the bathroom. I'm like an old lady. And I was like, And then my hair was shaved off, and I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, and I just looked like a convict. Because I also had bruises from all the strips and things. So I literally looked like I came out of prison. And you have to really mourn that loss of, feminine beauty. And think that God still gave me a husband that thinks I'm beautiful even without hair. And God also said to me, what makes you beautiful? Is it this, or is it me in you? So, yeah.
So we know that the grieving process is helped by some activities, some things that people can do during their grieving process to help them overcome some of the loss. As we said last time, we never really get over somebody. We just learn to accept that they have gone. But I know for myself, when I had been in a grieving process, I lost my father in 2000. It's been helpful to look back on some of the memory books that were made regarding him, some of the letters that were written about him. And we recommend some activities or actions that people can take in the grieving process. Some of them could be writing a letter of goodbye, or others could be having memorial dinners for a family to discuss the family member that has passed on, and then to just celebrate some of the happy memories that you had, some of the sad things, even some of the quirks of that person. So I want to ask Sins, how could you maybe just explain to us some of your grieving process related to Monet?
I think my grieving process can be split into two, because the battle was so long. So just to go back to the fight that we fought, on the night that Monet went in and they did the biopsy to determine what kind of cancer it is, it affected his speech, and from that night he couldn't speak to me at all. And because they had to put in a drain to keep the CSF levels correct, he was bedridden. So I think my mourning or my grieving process started there, where I lost the man that I'd married. Because he couldn't speak to me, he couldn't tell me what he was thinking. It's difficult facing this and not being able to confide in him. I think if the cancer is elsewhere in your body, jy kan nog met Fritz gesels daaroor. I couldn't speak to Mornay at all. And that was hard for me. So I started by grieving the man that I married, the man that I met when I was 14 years old. And that was the 2-year process. And then the day I lost him, I grieved the loss of him. Even though he wasn't the man that I married before, it was a complex grieving process. But what was great for me is I journaled. Every night I came back from hospital, I journaled and I wrote down so that Mornay could remember what he had gone through. But also because the boys were so little. So I've got these memory boxes that are in the garage. Every CD that Mornay had ever played on, every rugby games that I had of him. I've got boxes of rugby clothes and boots, and just to keep the memory of him alive for them. So there were these memory boxes that I made for them. And then the day at his memorial, I had papers printed in memory to Josh and Matt in memory of Mornay van der Merwe. And I think at the day of his memorial, there were over 1,000 people there, and everybody wrote down like special memories that they had of Mornay. And as we said before, he was everybody's Mornay. And everybody had a special memory of him. And I've had that bound for the boys. And one day when they're older and they want to look back and read up about their dad, it's there for them to do. So the grieving process, it was a long process, but it was in phases.
Yes.
Because of what we had to endure.
And since, how do you feel that some of these actions that you took, particularly whilst Mornay was still alive, helped you to process what you were losing?
I think putting pen to paper was good for me.
Yes.
I didn't want to just tell everybody my story. I was so tired of speaking at the end of the day because I had to speak for myself and for Mornay, that writing it down was good for me. The end of the day, when the house was quiet and the kids and everybody was in bed, that was my time to process what had happened during the day. It was my time with God, and it was my time to journal. I think that was key for me.
So we realize that in the grieving process, and we know there are a few stages of grieving and they're very fluid and people can be in different stages at different times, and the grieving process can be short for some and longer for others, or people can have a short grieving process and then a year or so later more stages come out. But I have in my experience seen that it's possible to get stuck in a stage of grieving to the extent that it actually becomes sinful, where people begin to take on self-pity as their identity and get stuck there. Or when, for instance, the actual loss becomes their identity and they never seem to move away from that and expect everybody to communicate or identify with them through that loss. So maybe you two ladies could give me an idea of where you feel you had the potential for something to become sinful, or it did become sinful and you've had to kind of find your way out of that place of sin. So maybe, Danelle, maybe you could give us some insight into that.
Yeah, definitely there have been many stages that where it's been very tempting to go into that place of self-pity and, anger at God. We've had quite a bit of bad news, if I can put it that way. I put it in little commas there because what we think is bad is not always God's idea of bad. It might be His very best for us. So we've had blow after blow of bad news, of the cancer spreading, of medication not working, things like that, where I've had to really not go into that place of unforgiveness, because I have been angry with God at times. It feels like literally like a father-daughter relationship where the dad says to the teenage daughter, no, you can't go to that party, and the daughter says, why not? It's a real relationship, because I think we miss the thing that we're allowed to wrestle things out with God because it's a relationship. And it's not a bad thing to ask God, why is this happening? But to make sure that we submit that to Him still, and knowing that He's a good Father, and knowing that our ways are not His ways, and our thoughts are not His thoughts. So yes, I've had times where I've had to forgive God, knowing that He's done nothing wrong, because if something is wrong, it's my problem. He's a perfect God. But I've had to forgive Him and for His decisions, even though I know that with my head knowledge, I know that His ways are good. But sometimes we need to come and say, God, please forgive me. I'm experiencing rejection through your decisions, because why isn't this working out the way that I wanted? There have been times where I've had to do that, and also I've had times where I've had to fight bitterness and self-pity. Last year, in the midst of the chaos, we had a big financial setback, and I remember going to Jeanette and bawling, and I just said to her, I don't understand. We've been glorifying God. Why is He allowing this to happen to you? I mean, amidst everything, now this is happening. And the Lord had shown someone else a prophetic picture of, it was basically a caution, and she decided at that moment, I'm going to share this picture that person shared with me. And it was literally a picture of this lady said she saw me standing outside of a building, and this building was falling in. And I said to her, let's go look what's happening there. And she said, no, we can't go there. And apparently in this picture, as I looked up, the people that were drawn into that place got locked up in this building. And it was a very scary looking person who did it. And it was a weird picture. And at that moment I realized, actually, God revealed it to me, and He said, it's bitterness. Like, you're being tempted into that place of, let's go look at that. Let's go to that place of bitterness and be trapped in there. But God just revealed that to me. And so He's also faithful to show us those things. And I think the key is to bring it into the light. Walk it through with your leaders and say, I'm experiencing this. Because the moment you bring it into the light, it breaks that power that sin has over our lives. And I think recently the Lord has also showed me that I'm very anxious about things, and that's also sinful. And to not put my anxieties above Him, to trust Him as my Father. So that's something I'm still currently walking through, and you have to just be accountable and bring it into the light.
I think if you look at your 5 steps of grief, getting stuck in any one of those 5 could be sinful. So did I bargain with God? Oh yes, I bargained with Him. Was I angry with Him? I shouted at Him. Did I isolate myself? Maybe for too long. So I think I went through all the stages, probably not depression, but I went through all the other stages. I remember being so angry with God and shouting and screaming at Him when I walked out of ICU the one day. And I said to Him, like, God, I prayed for Morne not to have cancer. He had cancer. I prayed for him not to need chemo. He needed it. I prayed for him not to have an infection. He got infection. And I was so angry with him because, God, you're a good God, and I'm your daughter, like you. And I sat there and I said, God, what is the use in praying? What is the use in asking? You're not listening to me. I was shouting at Him. And you know what? He is such a loving Father, because an audible voice. God spoke to me audibly 3 times during this time. And He just said to me, my girl, everything you've prayed for, everything you've asked for, what about my will and what I want for Mone's life? And I was like, sure, God, like, I am so selfish, because you're a good God all the time. So I think I grieved all those processes at the loss of Morne, but my biggest sort of pitfall that I could have faced was losing my identity, because I was Cindy, Morne's wife. In fact, I would introduce myself and go, I'm just the wife. Because he was such a big personality, and all of a sudden, I was a widow, I was a single mom, and I didn't know how to be those things. And that's when I pitied myself and I isolated myself. And everybody that surrounded us and everybody that loved us, I ran away from them. Russell, who's like a dad to me, I think I hurt him the most, because I wanted to run away from everything and everybody that knew me, because I didn't know who I was. And that was dangerous. And I can sit here today and say the enemy almost took me out. But thank you, Jesus, that He loves me so, and I listened to His voice, that I found myself in Him. Probably took me around 6 months. But I found who Cindy was in Jesus, and not who Cindy was, the elder's wife or Morne's wife. And I am so grateful for that.
Now that's actually a very important point, because very often as wives, we can find our identity through our husbands and what they do. And I think it's very important for us to find our identity in Jesus as his daughter and not identity through the man that we're married to, or even through some of the things that we do. Sometimes we can find identity through a gifting. And when for some reason that gifting is taken away, you can't function in that anymore, then we're left with, who are we really? So Sims, at what point did you realize that Monet was not going to be healed? And how did this impact your relationship with Jesus?
Kimmy, I think when you're saved, you walk this fine line of reality versus hope in Jesus. Like, you never, ever lose hope. So my trust in Jesus to heal him to the very end was there. I trusted God with everything. But, and I think you'll feel that now. There is a presence of God that is so tangible. And I felt it at the time, but I didn't realize how much God had carried me and how much he was with me till the day that grace was not upon me anymore. I remember it was almost towards the end of our 2-year journey. I felt like the family needed a break, so my folks and Monet's folks met us in Sedgefield, and I was driving in the car, and so I had to move Monet, physically pick him up, put him in a chair, but he was always able to help me. And I remember stopping in Wilderness, this parking lot, and I thought, let me just stretch his legs, let me just take some relief off his bum on a hard car seat. And we were in the parking lot, and I sort of picked him up out of the car, and I could feel that there was nothing in his legs. He couldn't stand, he couldn't help me, and a lady came running to me that there was only one other car in the parking lot. And I said, sorry, like he's fighting brain cancer, and she just said to me, I've overcome brain cancer. She was a brain cancer survivor. Anyway, but that split second that all his body weight was hanging on me, it was the second time that God spoke to me audibly. And he said to me, my girl, I'm taking the fight from you. And at that point I knew God gave me the ability to go through this, but he took it from me that day. And he just said, you know what, I'm not going to give you the strength to fight anymore because I'm going to bring my son home. And it was the 6th of December 2012 where God spoke to me and said, the fight is over.
Yeah, it's amazing. And he wasn't going to be healed here, but he certainly was going to be healed. And today stands in the presence of the Lord, completely healed and worshipping as only Monet could. So we know that as a church family, our heart's desire is to come alongside and meaningfully support people who are going through processes of loss or grieving. But sometimes inadvertently, we do or say the wrong thing. And at other times, what we do is incredibly helpful. And I know some people are much more comfortable with the grieving process and approach it in a healthy manner. Other people, because they're uncomfortable, may say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, but not to hurt or wound, but really just out of a place of ignorance, or they may think they're helping and they're actually causing some hurt or pain. So just wanted to ask these two ladies, what has been helpful, what has been unhelpful? And the reason we ask these questions is so that we can learn from what they're saying. Obviously, as I've said before, the purpose of this is to actually learn how to be very supportive, or as supportive as possible, with people going through processes of grieving. So Danelle, maybe you'd like to tell us.
What's been very helpful in this season has been church family, friends, blood family, everybody coming alongside us and just really loving on us. We've felt incredible support. The way our church family has loved us and brought us meals and just prayed for us, it's literally been a testimony to people, even in the medical field, that have worked with me in my situation. They literally have been testimonies to those people of how to love on people. I've literally seen them being surprised at the support structure we have. So just the practical thing of sometimes bringing a meal, sending a message, praying. I promise you, prayer is so key. I remember in the beginning of the journey, people were organizing prayer evenings at their houses, fasting for us. the overwhelming love we felt, by that sacrifice of time, of comfort, that's been incredible. And I've had incredible, thoughtful friends that have spoiled me in this time. I had one friend who sat with me in the ICU. Literally, it was so embarrassing because as an ICU can be, and this person just sat with me and she sat through all of it and she was like, no man, don't worry. Just sat there. Not saying anything, just company, just not trying to, make anything happen, just being with me, and that was incredible. And she also got my friends to make little cards for me. So that day she bought this box full of encouragement cards and she said, every day you can open one. And it was just something so special that means so much to me. And I had another friend who remembered what my favorite flower was when I once mentioned it to her. She, after the news came out, she bought the seeds of sweet peas, which are my favorite flowers, planted them, waited till they grew in the season, picked them while I was doing chemotherapy, and every time she visited me, she would bring me a bunch of sweet peas. And I just thought, okay, that's above and beyond, I think, that's incredible. But I just thought, wow, there are so many ways to show love, and that's been incredibly helpful. And just, people love you warts and all, actually. Yeah.
So maybe since I can ask you maybe what has been unhelpful.
Can I touch on both?
Yes.
Okay. I think what was helpful, and Dan alluded to some of those things from a practical point of view.
Yes.
Guys made us meals. And once again, people dropped off meals that I'd never met before. It trickled beyond JoshGen. On every single Wednesday night, there was a group of people that prayed persistently, and they were in it for the long haul outside of our home. And sometimes I had the capacity to let them in and pray inside, and other times they were just happy to stand outside on the veranda and pray, but they were there diligently. Prayer was a key thing because it carried me tangibly. I remember walking out of ICU the one night and I bumped into a girl that was not a JoshGenner. I said, what are you doing here? I know there's a prayer meeting for Monet downstairs in the chapel. And my dad, who was not saved at the time, was with me at the hospital. We walked down the corridor, and as we got to the corridor, the chapel was overflowing with people. And they ended up starting to minister to everybody that was walking out the hospital. But it was amazing the way that people rallied around us, and it carried us, and it wasn't just for the initial week, it was for weeks to follow. On Valentine's Day, I got flowers from Monet and a card from Monet, There were these kind little gestures from people that were just, I just knew that God had us, and it was extremely meaningful.
So I do know that as we've discussed things, we spoke about sometimes things that are maybe not always helpful, and one of those things related to the prophetic. And people obviously are meaning well and wanting to bring words of encouragement to you. But perhaps we can maybe talk about how this can be done well, and how sometimes in doing or delivering prophetic words, we maybe inadvertently bring more confusion or pain. So perhaps you can just explain a little bit of your experience with the prophetic in these processes.
Yeah, so I can't tell you how many prophetic words we received that Monet would get healed. And when you're in the situation, you hold on to every single little bit of hope, trusting that, sure, this is God. And even for the kids, they were also exposed to, oh, my daddy is going to get healed. So that was something that I needed to navigate, because Monet did get healed, but not the way that we thought he'd get healed. He's healed and healthy in heaven, not on earth with us. I had 5 prophetic words that I would have another child. In fact, somebody at the time said to me, I think you should fall pregnant now. And I thought, sure, that's a little crazy. But in that, I went to Woolies and I bought a pink and white striped baby grow. I hung it in front of Monet's bed and I thought, this is an aspiration to get better. Like, I need you in this. I can't fall pregnant by myself. And it was just an encouragement to him to get better. And he passed away. And I then hung that pink and white baby grow in my cupboard. And little did I know that I would get remarried and that pink and white baby grow would get filled. But at the time, there was a potential for it to cause confusion. So I think it's very, very important to go to an elder and to discuss something that you may have on your heart with an elder. Bounce it off them first as a safety net, because people's hearts are good. Their intentions are good. I wanted to see Monet healed as much as everybody else did. But there's a danger in just flippantly giving words without consulting an elder in the process.
Would you add anything to that, Danelle?
Yes, I think a way of doing it well, for example, is one lady felt, she had prophetic dreams. I'm not even sure how it came about, but she had these 3 pictures for me. She felt it was for me, and she was scared of just going and sharing it with me. So she went to my leader and said, listen, these are the 3 pictures that I saw for Danelle, but I'm going to leave it to you to share it as you see fit when you see the timing is right. And I so appreciate that, because if I had heard those 3 words, because they were radical words, and they were all spot on, actually, very accurate, but if I had heard them right there and then, it would have rocked me. Because the timing just wasn't right. But when Jeanette shared those words with me, the timing was right, because then it actually confirmed the chaos that was happening, you know? So I felt out of control when I heard, okay, the cancer spread again. But then there was a picture which she had shared with Jeanette that said she literally saw a weed being pulled out of my side, and there was a hole. And when she looked inside, she saw many little weeds still inside. So that word at that point showed me God knew this was going to happen. And it was just that anchor for me, you know, saying, okay, God, you knew this was going to happen. Thank you. I can trust you in this because I know you're in control, even though it doesn't feel that way. And so, yeah, the timing is very, very important, and wisdom needs to be applied. Yeah.
Wonderful. So we have mentioned that the grieving process is almost unique to individuals. Yes, there are all these different stages and phases, but it's a unique process to individuals. But sometimes people want to impose a grieving process on us, or want to almost expect us to be grieving in a specific way. Since I want to ask you, was that your experience where sometimes you felt that people were, or there was an expectation for you to be grieving in a specific way?
Definitely. As you mentioned, people grieve differently. And I'm not a hyper emotional person. So I'm quite practically minded. So I would compartmentalize my life. Is that a good thing? I think it could be good, but it's also dangerous because then you postpone grieving. But people definitely put an expectation on me how to grieve, but they didn't see me grieve always. So at Monet's memorial, I don't think I cried. I was strong that day. I couldn't speak, so I didn't make a speech at his memorial. But I grieved in the moment when I had to change his diaper. I grieved when I had to turn him every 2 hours. I grieved that he couldn't speak with me. So my grief was every single day, doing physiotherapy with him in a swimming pool. My grief was there when I held him and he couldn't stand with me. So my grieving process was different, but it wasn't always visible for everybody to see. Yeah, so there was definitely an expectation on me, and I think afterwards people were angry with me. They were like, but since when are you going to fall apart? When are you going to cry? Like, I need to see you cry. It's like, but I've shed so many tears. Maybe not for you to see, but... So there was definitely an expectation, a spoken expectation to me, that I had to deal with. I really struggled with it at some stages.
And so maybe we could say that it's probably fair to say that instead of imposing on a person how we think they should be grieving, maybe we should ask them how they're grieving, or how they have grieved, and just help them process some of the things they're going through or what they've gone through, as opposed to almost dictating what we would expect to see from the grieving process. So yeah, I think it's good for us to learn from these things and to implement them as we come alongside other people. Now, what have been some useful weapons of warfare that you have employed as you and Fritz have battled this challenge together?
I think one of the biggest things is to align yourself with truth, with what Scripture says about God and His character. I found that through the disappointments when the medicine doesn't work and they tell you they can't operate again and this chemo isn't working and now we need to try this, and you start to realize you can't put your hope in man, in medicines, in doctors. You can't. You can't even put your hope in your family, what they can bring to the situation. You have to put your hope and your faith in God and the truth of His character, because He remains the same. And also, I found that to not have that victim mentality, in the sense of, yes, it's real what we're going through. Yes, it's hard, but to still, we don't want to take a break from church. For us, it's like, okay, I was worship leading before I got sick. And then, it's not a coincidence that the thing that was attacked was my lungs. And suddenly it was hard to sing. And I just felt like it was such an attack from the enemy. And I just feel like what the enemy has meant for destruction, the Lord is going to use for good.
Yeah.
So when I can, I will lead worship. And even, when it is actually physically, it shouldn't be possible, but that's part of the miracle. The fact that I can still sing, on a Sunday on worship is for me already a miracle. Because if you see the state that my lung is in, it's already such a testimony of God's healing power and what He's doing through the situation. So for Fritz and myself, it's one of the big weapons has been to just not shrink back and come in the opposite spirit. And it's not always easy because it is a battle. And I think sometimes when we've had big setbacks, we've come with the attitude of, I'm going to go lead worship, we're going to do it, and we've got an incredible support system that allows us to do it. People that love us, that are willing to look after Amelia while Fritz is serving on sound and I'm on worship, So that's been a big one. And basically personal times of worship, pushing into God, washing yourself with His truth, and surrender, over and over again. And in that place of surrender, freedom comes. And when you focus your eyes on Jesus' face and you're in His presence and you focus on that place, then thankfulness comes and perspective comes. And that's been for us, well, for me, that's been a very key thing. And for Fritz, surrender has been a big thing. I actually asked him, I said to him, what would you say is our strategy in the battle? And he said one word, surrender, because he learned to let go. And I think, and then practically for us if you're going through something like this as a couple, as a husband and wife, to be open with communication, to recognize that it is sad and we are grieving, and to allow each other the space to grieve and not have unrealistic expectations of each other, and to give each other that space. Because I think we put that expectation on each other, of you should be strong for me kind of thing, but actually he's going through grieving as much as I am, maybe even more, so to have that open communication, being able to say, I'm struggling, and to have fun together and do things together, make special memories.
Wonderful. And so, particularly in Cindy's process of grieving, there are children involved. They're obviously with you, Danelle, but she's still very small. Cindy's children are older, and they've had to go through that process of probably understanding that their dad was dying, and then subsequently the grieving process after that. And I think it's very important that we do remember that we create space for children to grieve as well. And sometimes it feels to me that it's very important to see other people grieving around them, which then gives them permission to grieve. Otherwise, they may feel that their tears or their grieving process is going to upset somebody else, and maybe they contain their own grieving process. So how did you bring your boys into this whole grieving process of Monet?
So I mentioned before, Matty was 4 at the time, and Joshie had just turned 7. It was 2 weeks after his 7th birthday, and Joshie was a daddy's boy through and through. If I speak with Matt now, Matty's 13. Matthew can't really remember Monet, even though he's a splitting image of him down to the last freckle, and he's got that feisty personality. Joshie was a little older, and Joshie remembers. As I said, he was an absolute daddy's boy. But I'm a firm believer that kids need love, discipline, and routine. And they continued having that. They still went to school. Nothing in their little environment changed much, because I think that creates a security for them. But I also felt that it was an ideal opportunity for them to understand the bigness of God. Because now remember, Daddy was still there, but Daddy couldn't speak to me. And Monet was in and out of hospital for the first year for a period of 7 months. And a lot of that time he was spent in ICU, and kids are not allowed into ICU. So for extended period of times, the boys couldn't actually see him. But Monet was very much alive in our home. So there were times where I thought, okay, now I'm going to teach the boys spiritual warfaring. And I would pray, Matthew would pray, Joshie would pray, I would pray, Matthew would pray, Joshie would pray. And it was what we did in our home. I remember the one night, and it was very real to them. I didn't hide anything from them. And I think it's not, look, there's discernment in what you let kids know and not. But they know what's going on. And I remember the one morning when I had a seizure, and a bunch of guys from a community down the road, we loaded him in the car and we took him off to Vincent Pallotti. And I came home the following day, and as I pulled into the garage, Joshie said to me, Mommy, is Daddy going to die? I said, Josh, I don't know, my boy, if Daddy's going to die, but what if he does? And he said, then I'll be okay, you'll be okay, Matthew will be okay, because Jesus has looked after us all this time. He won't stop doing that. And I was just like, sure, he's got it. God, he's got it. And it's pointing them to Jesus. It's not pointing them. A family member said to them, listen, you must pray for Daddy because Daddy will get healed. And I got so angry because that's not our promise to make.
Yes.
You know, we hold on to the promises of God, but we ultimately don't know what those are. And I remember Matt was in the car with Amy, and she came back and she said to me, Matt was driving in the car and he was singing, my daddy is sick, 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 and my mommy, just praise. And that was his little song, and it was like, but they see what we're running to. Our kids see what we're running to. Yes. Are we running to alcohol? Are we running to friends? Are we running to our work? But they saw that we ran to Jesus. That's what we did. And today I can tell you that the boys have a good understanding of God and who He is. And they were discussing loss in kids' church a year or so ago. And they were talking about healing. And Joshie said, but my daddy is healed. He's not healed on earth, but he's healed in heaven. Like they've got an understanding of the goodness of God. And make your kids part of that journey. You know, it's their testimony as much as it is my testimony. It's something that they are going through. I mean, Joshie now, Matt, if I speak of Monet, once again, it's memories that I'm creating for him because he can't really remember. Joshie remembers, and Joshie runs away from speaking about Monet. He doesn't want to speak about Monet. And a couple of weeks ago, Joshie's turning 16 now in December, we went for a run, and for the first time Monet actually came up as a topic of conversation. He was like, Mom, what was the last thing that he said to you? It's like he's holding on to, like, did he tell you that he loves me? Was it like a movie moment? I felt like that's what he was looking for. I could say to him, boy, that wasn't the case. But I know that I'm yet to know a better dad. He was a good dad, and he loved you. And we were running, because boys speak not when they look you in the eyes. They've got to be distracted when they speak with you. And he just cried and cried and cried. And that's okay. I think you need to give your kids space to process it in their time. May Matt still process it in a year's time. Yes, that memory box is there with everything that he wants to know. But once again, kids grieve differently to grown-ups. But yes, I made them very much a part of the process. There was just something that I wanted to add. In me being married now, Emil is an amazing dad. And part of the reason why Joshua doesn't want to speak about Monet is honouring Emil. And Emil speaks about Mornay, even though he didn't know him, he knows the man that he was. It's something that Josh has put upon himself, that he doesn't want to hurt Emil because he loves him so much. And Emil's an amazing father, but it's something that I obviously need to help Josh through. That it's okay to speak about him.
Yes.
Because nobody's putting it on him that it's not okay. It's not an
Yes.
obsolete topic in our home. Yeah.
So Danelle, I think we are all human, and we have thought processes all the time. And while we always have hope, we do know that we always have hope because Jesus is our hope. But I guess I wanted to ask you, what is your greatest fear as you look forward? What is your greatest fear?
There are a few fears. I know God is good, and I know He's spoken promises over us. But there's still the tension of, at the end of the day, we don't understand everything. And it's His decision, and He's a good Father, and He's sovereign. And I have to trust that whatever He decides, His will is good. So that being said, one of the fears that I sometimes struggle with is that my daughter will not remember me. Oh. That I won't see her grow up. But I know she's loved. Yeah. Yeah, so that's from a mommy perspective. And another one is, one of the fears is that the people that are left behind, I don't want their faith to be rocked if I don't get healed. And I want that disappointment to derail them, you know. But I also can't protect them. It's not my role. So yeah, that's the real one. And another note, when things were better last year in my health, there was a time where there was a sense of normality, where we had almost, things were going back to normal, and we were, a relatively normal family of 3. And I realized we forget so quickly. We forget that what God has done, and we go back into the mundane things, and we start, forgetting the work He's done. And one of my fears is Him healing me and me forgetting, wow, what He's done in this time, because it's so precious. There's things that hardship teaches you and deepens in your relationship with God that can never be learned in a different way. And I never want to miss that, and I don't want to miss what God is doing in my life. And I remember in the beginning of the journey, somebody saying to me, don't miss what God is doing in this season. No matter what you do, keep focusing on Him. Ask Him, Lord, what do you want to do in this season? And don't miss that thing. Let it not be in vain. Yeah.
Wonderful. That's so true. As we come alongside people who are going through processes of grieving and mourning, it gives us an opportunity to learn from their experiences. And what Danelle said now is so valuable, that we actually learn to sift out what is really important in life and to focus on those things. And I think for all of us, there's a sense that we want to live our lives in a way that the King is glorified, and not one day stand before Him and realize that we focused on a lot of the mundane, unimportant stuff, and we missed out on the stuff that was not only important to the people around us, but that was hugely important to Him as well. And so, thanks, Danelle. I feel like we can really learn from that. It's an important thing for us to take on board. So since, as you have already said, you have remarried, and Emil is an absolutely amazing man. But I would like to ask, in your experience now, how would you say your approach to marriage has changed as opposed to maybe how you conducted yourself in your first marriage? Has there been a change in the way you've approached marriage sort of second time around?
Look, I think God has always put a passion in my heart for marriage. Mona and I did a lot of marriage counselling, but at the time I was young and very feisty. I gave the poor oak a tough time because I would fight for my right. But now, I realize what is important in marriage.
Yes.
I really think I do. I don't think Emil and I have really ever fought. You know, the small little things that are insignificant, that often when we're married for a short period of time, or your first marriage, you argue about tiny, insignificant little things. And I was definitely that person. Even though Monet was a strong personality, as I spoke with Jenny last night, she's like, he needed a strong personality. I'm like, yeah, but I think my personality was dead too strong. You realize what is important. You realize that arguing about tiny little things, yes, a good marriage and having fun together is so much more important. And then from a time perspective, we were full-time elders. Or Monet was the elder, I was the wife. A lot of our time was with people and in the church, that actually we had a calendar in our kitchen, and we'd have to put one night a week out for us, because the rest of the time was just people. I think time in your marriage is important. It's something that I value now. Emil and I are good with date nights. We are intentional with spending time with the boys, and we are intentional about family holidays and doing stuff together. Whereas with Monet and I remember we were walking on the beach with Roux and Jen a week before he went into hospital, and he said, this year I want to spend more time with my family, and I want to be intentional about that. And it was too late. So it's something that I definitely value now, and I'm so grateful that Emil values exactly the same thing. Is just honor your husband, love your husband, don't fight for your right, like you're in a team, you're together, and just appreciate time together, because it's valuable.
Amazing. Yeah, I think we can all learn from that, in that we may not have a second chance. The marriage you're in now is the marriage that you're in now, and let us truly honor God through our marriages and make good memories together, and as Son said, maybe not to sweat all the small stuff. So the truth is, we never go through any process in life and remain unchanged, either for the better or for the worse. But we can choose how we're going to allow the process to mold us into the image of Jesus. How we're going to become more like Jesus in this process. So we can become bitter, or we can become better. I would like to ask you both, how do you feel that this process has changed you?
I think people often struggle with the idea of, why do bad things happen to good people? The reality is, none of us are good people actually, because as the word says, we've all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And we are in a fallen world, and there is going to be disease, there's going to be death. And we shouldn't actually be surprised when we go through hard times, because that's what the word says. I think one of the big things though is the Lord has used the situation to shake the very foundations that we've built on, and He's used the situation to show cracks in our foundations. For example, I remember crying out to the Lord when I heard that all the cancer wasn't removed, and I wasn't clear or whatever. I remember begging God to take the cup of chemotherapy away from me, and I was petrified of it. And then I felt that the Lord had heard me, because I was begging Him for mercy the whole time. I said, Lord, please have mercy, please take this cup from me, let me not go for chemotherapy, because it was one of the big things I was scared of. And then the Lord led me to the scripture in Psalm 116 verse 1, where it says, I love the Lord because He hears my voice and my prayer for mercy. Because He bends down to listen, I will pray as long as I have breath. And I, in that moment, felt the Lord has heard me, He's going to show me His mercy. I believe that I'm not going to have chemotherapy, because He's heard my prayer for mercy. I mean, how direct answer do you need? And then I found out that it had spread, and now I have to have not only cancer, chemo, but the strongest chemotherapy there is, basically, and in combination with a very strong other one. And I just thought, oh my goodness. Now, I prayed, and it's the opposite that happened. And then I just realized, and the Lord showed me that our idea of mercy is not His idea of mercy. because in him allowing me to go through chemotherapy and allowing me to go through cancer, and it's physically, my body is taking strain, my body is sick, but he has shown spiritual cracks in my foundation that never would have come, I don't believe it would have come
To the surface.
to the surface without this happening. And he actually loves us enough to allow these things physically to happen to us so that he can heal our hearts. He's much more concerned about eternity than our physical things. And I just realized that we need to almost renew our minds in the sense with what our idea is of mercy and God's idea of mercy. Because you know what? He did show me mercy. He was merciful enough to not let me stay the same that I was.
Yes.
And I promise you, it's a walking out. I mean, it's not like I have arrived at all. God is still showing cracks in my foundations. He has revealed recently a very big one. And then you actually end up wondering, am I even safe? But the thing is, yes, we are by grace.
Yes.
And in that way, he's changed my view of him, and my relationship has deepened with him, because you actually realize, wow, I know nothing. And my perception of basic things like mercy or humility or grace is actually flawed because I'm broken.
Yeah.
And God has just come and, he's been merciful in this situation.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And since, what would you say it's been changed in you?
That I'm never going to understand God, really. There's a Chris Tomlin song that I held on to during, and it's my theme song. It's the theme song of my life. Then he sings and he says, from the beginning to the end, I can trust you. God, whatever comes my way, I can trust you. And I listen to that when I am baffled with the situation and the situation that I'm in and what's going on. And in this time, I've walked away and I've realized, God, I trust you. I don't want anything. I don't want the new job. I don't want the house. I don't want to go to a different congregation unless God has said, my girl, you can move. I've learned to trust him implicitly. I don't want anything unless God said so. Before I was independent and I said I was strong, but I think it's taught me that God is good all the time, when I can make sense of it, when I can't make sense of it. That's it. I don't want it if it's not of him.
Yeah. Wonderful. So for me, it's just amazing that we have a hope, and this hope is Jesus.
Yeah.
And that Psalm 46 speaks of him being a fortress that we can run to in times of trouble, and just find ourselves in peace and joy in that place. And while the world may rage around us, we can find comfort and hope in that place, no matter what the outcome. And to just coin a phrase, I really do believe that it's important that we don't waste our suffering. We don't waste our suffering.